I am a person who is so thankful for having lived all these years in a land where I could be myself to the best of my ability, where I could work. I've had three small businesses: a drywall company, a jewelry manufacturing shop, and a retail jewelry store. Between those businesses, I've also had other forms of self-employment and unemployment. I could do and be whatever I wished. I noticed down through the decades my ability to do and be as I wish has been greatly diminished. Incrementally, decade by decade, more government restrictions, more curtailments, more limitations, more expenses, fees, license, all of these government attributes.
Would you also say more abuse of the Constitution?
The Constitution began to be abused right from day one. Uh, you had President John Adams created something called the Alien and Sedition Acts and got it through Congress. And Thomas Jefferson and James Madison wrote, respectively, the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions in response to this Alien and Sedition Act. The presidency at that time was having journalists arrested if they published a criticism against the administration. Oh, that's sedition. Okay? This was a violation of the First Amendment. So Thomas Jefferson and James Madison had these resolutions drawn up that are a guideline for us today. The states must interpose and limit the power of the federal government when it exceeds its constitutional granted power. So it is up to the states who created the federal government to make sure that the federal government does what it's supposed to do and does not do what it is not supposed to do, including violate our rights. The federal government, let's give you a good example. Back in April, I went down to the Bundy Ranch at Bunkerville, Nevada, and there had been there BLM, Bureau of Land Management, government agents roping off free speech zones where the ranchers who didn't like what the BLM was doing with the public lands there, if they wanted to protest or raise their voices in dissent, they had to go get inside these roped off areas called free speech zones or First Amendment zones. As one of the ranchers exclaimed, "My goodness, America is a free speech zone. You can't designate one little place and then say outside that rope you no longer have your First Amendment."
You're saying you can't, but they are doing it.
Well, they did it. And the cowboys, thank God for good Americans, the cowboys decided we're not going to put up with this. And so the BLM brought out up to approximately 200 guns. They brought snipers and pointed their sniper rifles at Mr. and Mrs. Bundy's children in their own yard. They did that before anybody came out there to help them.
What was the core issue?
The core issue on that is something that
The BLM, what did they want from the Bundys? What did they want?
the BLM wanted Mr. Bundy to remove his cattle from public land and to pay what they had assessed to be in excess of $1 million in back grazing fees. The patriarch of that family, Cliven Bundy, was a constitutionalist, still is, and he understood that the BLM does not have lawful claim to regulate or manage the public lands inside the state of Nevada unless it's a military installation or a postal road or an FBI office in a city. They don't, BLM does not have the authority to manage this land. Prior to the BLM coming in there in the 90s and changing the rules, Mr. Bundy was paying grazing fees, but he was paying it to Clark County, Nevada, and to the state of Nevada, not to the general government in Washington, D.C. Well, the general government, they want total control these days, and they want compliance, and if somebody opposes them, they will squash that person. You can look at Waco, Texas, as a classic example. Okay?
So-
They will squash you if you oppose their authority. So,
So you're saying the Bundy family, Mr. Bundy was saying, I'll pay to the state, I'm not paying to the government.
I'm not paying to the federal government.
Use his name.
Cliven Bundy had been paying grazing fees on those cattle all along, up until the BLM changed the rules and wanted the payments made to the BLM. And Mr. Bundy knew that he had no lawful moral obligation to pay money to the federal government for managing his cattle's grazing on public land that belonged to the state of Nevada. Now, how did he know that? He was familiar with the Enabling Acts. The act that brought a territory into statehood has certain legal contingencies there. And the equal footing laws, where all the states must be brought into the Union with equal footing on all the others, going right back to the original 13. This is the truth that the American media and the U.S. federal government today does not want the American people to know. But there's an answer to how they can know that, and it's called the AmericanLandsCouncil.com or .org. American Lands Council. They have done the research. Mr. Bundy is right. The BLM has no authority there to be collecting taxes or managing that.
My battery.
Okay.